Ladies and gentlemen, we're told from a young age that being nice is a virtue, especially for women. Be polite, be accommodating, don't upset anyone. But what happens when this niceness becomes a cage? What happens when you, in your effort to be nice, begin to lose yourself? The first thing we must understand is this niceness is not the same as kindness. Niceness is often a facade. A facade. A performance meant to avoid conflict, rejection, or disapproval. Kindness, on the other hand, is rooted in strength. It is deliberate, honest, and real. But when we conflate the two, we end up prioritizing appearances over authenticity. Let me be clear, there is nothing wrong with being kind. But being nice in the way society expects at the expense of your own needs, boundaries, and identity is dangerous. It's a recipe for resentment, burnout, and invisibility. The problem starts with boundaries, or rather, the lack of them. A nice girl struggles to say no. She doesn't want to disappoint anyone, so she stretches herself thin, constantly giving, constantly accommodating. And do you know what happens when you don't set boundaries? People will take advantage not because they're evil, but because you've allowed it. And why do we allow it? Fear. Fear of being disliked. Fear of being called difficult. But let me tell you something, the need to be universally liked is a prison of your own making. Not everyone will like you, and that's okay. Their disapproval is not a reflection of your worth. What you need is assertiveness. Now, some people hear assertive and think aggressive. That's not true. Assertiveness is simply the ability to speak your truth clearly and respectfully. It's saying, this is who I am, and this is what I need without apology. But society has fed us a dangerous myth that a woman's greatest virtue is her ability to sacrifice. Sacrifice for her family, for her friends, for her colleagues. And while sacrifice has its place, it cannot define your life. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You matter too. Let's talk about the consequences of being too nice. You will be overlooked. You will be undervalued. You may even be exploited, not because people are inherently malicious, but because they sense that you will not push back. That is the price of niceness. So what's the alternative? Reclaim your authenticity. Stop being the nice girl and start being the real woman, the one who values her voice, who sets boundaries, and who isn't afraid to be seen as strong, bold, or even difficult. Because in the end, it is your authenticity, not your niceness, that will earn you respect. This is not a call to abandon compassion or empathy. It's a call to anchor them in self-respect. Being true to yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. So stop being the nice girl and start being the powerful, authentic woman you were meant to be. Being nice is often praised as an admirable quality, but it can come at a hidden cost. For many, niceness is less about genuine care for others and more about avoiding discomfort, conflict, rejection, or the possibility of making someone else upset. This kind of niceness is often rooted in fear rather than strength, and it creates a pattern of behavior that prioritizes the needs, feelings, and preferences of others over your own authenticity and well-being. What does it really mean to be nice? On the surface, it seems harmless. You avoid disagreements, you say yes to things you don't want to do, and you make yourself as accommodating as possible. But beneath this behavior lies a deeper problem. Being nice in this way is often a subtle act of self-betrayal. Every time you smile and nod when you want to say no. Every time you suppress your thoughts to keep the peace, you're reinforcing a narrative that says your needs don't matter as much as someone else's. This behavior often stems from a fear of rejection or disapproval. It's the fear that if you assert yourself, if you speak up, disagree, or establish a boundary, others might withdraw their affection or respect. And while that fear is understandable, it is also paralyzing. The truth is, not everyone will approve of you, and that's okay. The belief that you must be universally liked is a trap, one that keeps you small, compliant, and invisible. Another problem with this form of niceness is that it often creates resentment. You might not feel it at first, but over time, the weight of constantly putting others first begins to take its toll. You start to notice how much energy you expend keeping others comfortable while your own needs go unmet. This resentment doesn't just damage your relationships, it also eats away at your sense of self-worth. What's more, the people around you, those who benefit from your niceness, may not even realize the internal conflict you're experiencing. They might see you as easygoing or selfless, unaware of the frustration and exhaustion building beneath the surface. In some cases, this dynamic can even lead to exploitation. When you don't set boundaries, when you don't push back, people are likely to assume you're okay with the status quo, even if you're not. The irony is that niceness often fails to achieve its intended goal. You might hope that by being nice you'll be liked or appreciated, but the opposite is often true. Over time, people may begin to take you for granted. They may even lose respect for you, mistaking your niceness for weakness. Ultimately, being nice in this way isn't a virtue, it's a survival strategy, one that keeps you safe but also stuck. Real strength comes not from being universally accommodating, but from learning to prioritize your authenticity over your fear of rejection. Niceness without authenticity is hollow, and it comes at a price too steep to pay. Niceness and kindness are often used interchangeably, but they are fundamentally different concepts. Understanding the distinction between the two is essential to living an authentic and empowered life. Niceness is often about compliance and maintaining appearances, driven by a desire to avoid conflict or win approval. It's about smoothing over tensions, keeping people happy, and ensuring that no one feels uncomfortable, even at the expense of your own needs or feelings. Kindness, however, is an entirely different quality. It comes from a place of strength, compassion, and integrity, rooted in a genuine desire to care for others while remaining true to yourself. When someone is nice, it's often performative. They might agree to things they don't actually want to do, offer compliments they don't truly mean, or go along with decisions they don't support. The goal isn't to be honest or authentic, but to avoid friction. This kind of behavior is rooted in fear of rejection, fear of being disliked, fear of standing out or causing discomfort. Niceness is about self-preservation, but in a way that often diminishes the self. It places the comfort of others above your own authenticity, creating a cycle where you prioritize being agreeable over being genuine. Kindness, on the other hand, is not about avoidance or fear. It's about intentional care and consideration for others, balanced with self-respect. A kind person can say no when necessary, not because they don't care, but because they recognize their own limits and value their well-being. Kindness is honest. It doesn't require you to suppress your truth or betray your boundaries. Instead, it allows you to express care in ways that are genuine and sustainable without compromising your identity. The difference between niceness and kindness becomes especially clear in difficult situations. A nice person might avoid addressing an issue altogether to keep the peace, even if doing so allows problems to fester or relationships to deteriorate beneath the surface. A kind person, however, will confront the issue with honesty and respect. They'll address the conflict not to hurt or provoke, but to resolve and strengthen. This takes courage, but it also leads to more meaningful and authentic connections. One of the most important distinctions is that niceness often seeks external validation, while kindness is internally driven. A nice person might act out of a need to be liked, hoping their compliance will earn them approval or affection. Kindness, however, isn't contingent on what others think. A kind person acts from their own values, regardless of whether their actions are recognized or praised. Niceness often leads to resentment and exhaustion because it requires constant self-sacrifice without acknowledgement. Kindness, however, feels fulfilling because it stems from choice rather than obligation. When you act with kindness, you give from a place of abundance rather than depletion, ensuring that your care for others doesn't come at the cost of your own well-being. Understanding this difference is crucial, because while niceness might make life easier in the short term, kindness is what builds trust, respect, and lasting relationships over time. Setting boundaries is one of the most critical aspects of self-respect and emotional well-being, yet it's an area where many people, particularly women conditioned to be nice, struggle the most. When you lack boundaries, you essentially teach others how to treat you, often at the expense of your own needs, values, and energy. Boundaries are not just walls that keep people out. They are guidelines that define how you wish to be treated and how you are willing to engage with others. Without them, you risk becoming a doormat, overburdened and underappreciated, and this often stems from a fear of upsetting or disappointing others. For many nice girls, saying no feels impossible. The fear of conflict, rejection, or being seen as selfish leads to a default response of compliance. But the truth is, constantly saying yes to others often means saying no to yourself. You stretch yourself thin, sacrificing your time, energy, and emotional capacity to accommodate others' demands, expectations, and desires. Over time, this pattern of self-neglect doesn't just lead to resentment, it erodes your sense of self-worth. What's important to understand is that boundaries are not acts of hostility or selfishness, they are acts of self-care. A boundary isn't about shutting people out, but about showing them how to connect with you in a way that is respectful and sustainable. It's about drawing a line and saying, this is what I can give, and this is what I cannot. When you set boundaries, you communicate to others and to yourself that your time, energy, and feelings are valuable and deserve consideration. The challenge for many is that boundaries often require confrontation, something nice girls are taught to avoid at all costs. You might worry that setting a boundary will make someone upset, or that it will damage your relationships. And yes, sometimes people will react poorly, especially if they've been used to your constant availability or willingness to accommodate. But here's the truth: people who genuinely respect and care for you will honor your boundaries. Those who don't are revealing that their respect was conditional on your compliance, not your authenticity. Setting boundaries also helps to foster healthier, more authentic relationships. When you're clear about your limits, you create a foundation of mutual respect. Instead of overextending yourself and harboring hidden resentment, you're able to show up fully and genuinely for the people and commitments that truly matter to you. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort is often the price of growth. Without boundaries, people will inevitably take advantage, not necessarily out of malice, but because they see no reason not to. It's human nature to push until met with resistance. When you fail to set limits, you inadvertently give others permission to disregard your needs. Learning to say no is not just about protecting yourself from others, it's about affirming your own worth. You are not obligated to give more than you have, and you are allowed to take up space in your own life. The fear of disapproval is one of the most insidious forces that keeps people trapped in the cycle of being nice for many, especially women conditioned to please others. The thought of someone being upset with them or thinking poorly of them is almost unbearable. This fear drives behaviors like over-apologizing, avoiding confrontation, or agreeing to things you don't want to do. But the truth is, living to avoid disapproval is not living authentically, it's living as a shadow of who you are, shaped by the expectations and opinions of others rather than your own values and desires. At its core, the fear of disapproval stems from a deep-seated need for acceptance. Humans are social creatures. We thrive on connection and belonging. For centuries, survival depended on being part of a group, and this instinct still lingers. However, in modern society, this fear of rejection is often exaggerated and misplaced. We equate someone's disapproval with a threat to our worth, and as a result, we bend ourselves into shapes that are easier for others to accept, even when it costs us our own integrity. The problem with trying to avoid disapproval is that it's impossible to succeed. No matter how hard you try, you cannot please everyone. People have their own perspectives, values, and expectations, and what one person loves about you, another might dislike. Chasing universal approval is a futile endeavor that only leads to exhaustion and frustration. Worse, it leaves you feeling powerless, as your sense of self-worth becomes dependent on the shifting opinions of others. When you live in fear of disapproval, you also create a pattern of self-abandonment. Every time you silence your voice to avoid conflict, every time you say yes when you want to say no, you teach yourself that your feelings and needs are less important than someone else's comfort. Over time, this erodes your self-esteem and leaves you feeling invisible, even to yourself. Ironically, the fear of disapproval often backfires. People can sense when you are inauthentic, and trying too hard to please everyone can make you seem insincere or untrustworthy. On the other hand, those who are willing to be honest and assertive, even at the risk of disapproval, are often respected more. Authenticity is magnetic, and while not everyone will like you, the people who do will value the real you, not the version of you that's been edited for their convenience. Breaking free from the fear of disapproval requires a mindset shift. You have to accept that not everyone's opinion of you matters, and that some people's disapproval is inevitable and even necessary. Growth requires discomfort, and sometimes that means making choices that others won't like. But here's the liberating truth: their disapproval is not a reflection of your worth. It's simply a sign that you are prioritizing your own values and needs over their expectations, and that's okay. Learning to tolerate disapproval is a critical step toward reclaiming your authenticity and living a life that feels true to who you are. Assertiveness is one of the most misunderstood yet essential skills for living a balanced and authentic life. Many people confuse assertiveness with aggression, particularly when it comes to women. From a young age, girls are often socialized to avoid being too loud, too demanding, or too strong-willed, as these traits are incorrectly seen as unfeminine or hostile. As a result, many women grow up afraid to express their thoughts, needs, or boundaries, opting instead to be nice and accommodating. But assertiveness is not aggression, it is clarity, honesty, and strength wrapped in respect. It's the skill of communicating your truth without diminishing someone else's. At its core, assertiveness is about valuing your own needs and opinions as much as you value those of others. It's the ability to say yes when you mean it and no when you don't, without guilt or fear. When you're assertive, you don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable, nor do you bulldoze others to get your way. Instead, you strike a balance advocating for yourself while still respecting the perspectives and boundaries of those around you. Unfortunately, assertiveness is often misunderstood and unfairly criticized, particularly when women practice it. A man who speaks his mind is seen as confident and decisive, but a woman doing the same might be labeled as difficult or bossy. This double standard creates a social pressure for women to stay agreeable and compliant, even when it's at their own expense. However, the fear of being disliked or criticized should never stop you from standing up for yourself. Being assertive isn't about winning a popularity contest, it's about living with integrity and self-respect. One of the greatest benefits of assertiveness is that it allows you to set boundaries clearly and effectively. When you're assertive, you're able to communicate what you need, what you're willing to tolerate, and where your limits are, without feeling the need to justify yourself excessively. For example, if someone asks you to take on an extra task at work that you don't have time for, being assertive means saying, "I appreciate you thinking of me, but I can't take on anything more right now," rather than over-explaining or reluctantly agreeing. This type of direct, respectful communication not only protects your time and energy, but also earns you respect from others. Assertiveness also leads to healthier relationships. When you're clear about your needs and boundaries, you prevent misunderstandings and resentment from building up. Instead of harboring frustration over unmet needs or feeling overburdened by others' expectations, you create a dynamic of mutual respect and understanding. People know where you stand and they're more likely to trust and value you because of your honesty. The fear of practicing assertiveness often comes from a fear of rejection or conflict, but these are not outcomes to be avoided at all costs. Sometimes someone may disagree with your stance or dislike your refusal to accommodate their request. That's okay. Disagreements are a natural part of human interaction and don't diminish your worth. In fact, they often strengthen relationships by fostering open and honest communication. Assertiveness isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about handling it with grace and integrity. Practicing assertiveness takes courage, especially in a world that often rewards passivity in women. But the rewards are worth it. When you learn to express yourself confidently and respectfully, you reclaim your voice, your power, and your right to live authentically. Assertiveness isn't just a skill, it's a declaration that you value yourself enough to be heard. The idea of self-sacrifice is deeply ingrained in our culture, especially for women. From an early age, women are often celebrated for putting others first, whether it's their families, friends, or colleagues. This concept of sacrifice is romanticized, portrayed as the ultimate virtue, and tied closely to notions of being caring, nurturing, and selfless. While there's nothing wrong with acts of sacrifice when they are freely chosen and balanced, the myth that constant self-sacrifice is the hallmark of a good person, especially a good woman, is not only damaging but unsustainable. Living a life built on perpetual sacrifice means constantly giving away your time, energy, and emotional resources without replenishing them. It creates an internal narrative that your value comes from what you do for others, not who you are. Over time, this mindset can lead to feelings of depletion, frustration, and even resentment. The truth is, while society might applaud you for being endlessly selfless, it rarely pauses to ask whether you're okay or whether you're being supported in return. One of the most harmful aspects of this myth is that it teaches women to equate saying no with selfishness. If you decline to help, set a boundary, or prioritize your own needs, you might feel guilty or worry about being judged. But saying no isn't selfish, it's necessary. Constantly sacrificing your own well-being for the sake of others doesn't make you noble, it makes you exhausted. You cannot pour from an empty cup. To give your best to others, you must first ensure that you're taking care of yourself. Another consequence of glorifying sacrifice is that it often leads to unhealthy dynamics in relationships. When you constantly put others first, it sets an expectation that your needs are secondary or worse, non-existent. Over time, this can result in people taking you for granted or even exploiting your willingness to give. Relationships that thrive on one-sided sacrifice are neither healthy nor sustainable. True connection comes from mutual respect and care, where both parties' needs are acknowledged and valued. The myth of sacrifice also stunts personal growth and fulfillment. When you're so focused on meeting everyone else's needs, you rarely have the time or energy to pursue your own passions, goals, or aspirations. You may find yourself stuck in a cycle of pleasing others, feeling unfulfilled, and then wondering why you're unhappy despite doing everything right. The answer lies in the imbalance. Sacrifice, when it becomes a way of life rather than an occasional choice, robs you of the opportunity to fully live your own life. It's important to challenge the narrative that self-sacrifice is the pinnacle of virtue. While caring for others is a beautiful and meaningful part of life, it cannot come at the expense of your own health, happiness, and identity. Sacrifice has its place, but it must be a choice, not an expectation or obligation. By letting go of the myth that you must always put others first, you create space for a more balanced, authentic, and fulfilling life, one where your needs matter just as much as everyone else's. Seeking external validation is a deeply ingrained habit for many, particularly for those who have been conditioned to be nice. The need for others' approval often starts early in life, reinforced by societal norms, familial expectations, and cultural messages that equate likability with worthiness. While the desire to be appreciated and respected is natural, constantly relying on external validation to determine your value is a dangerous trap. It shifts the power over your self-worth into the hands of others and leaves you perpetually chasing approval that may never come, or that can disappear at any moment. When your self-esteem is tied to what others think, you become vulnerable to their ever-changing opinions, moods, and expectations. A single piece of criticism can shatter your confidence, while a compliment can temporarily boost it. But this roller coaster of self-worth is exhausting and unsustainable. It keeps you in a state of dependence, where your sense of identity is shaped not by who you are or what you believe in, but by what others want from you. Over time, this creates an internal disconnect, as your actions become increasingly driven by a desire to please others rather than a reflection of your own authentic values and needs. Living for external validation also encourages self-suppression. To gain approval, you may downplay your strengths, silence your opinions, or conform to expectations that don't align with who you truly are. This kind of behavior often results in a growing sense of dissatisfaction and even resentment because deep down you know you're not living authentically. The more you prioritize others' opinions, the more you lose sight of your own voice, until eventually you may find yourself wondering who you are without the constant feedback of others. This cycle of seeking validation can also lead to burnout. Constantly trying to meet everyone's expectations is an impossible task. People's needs and desires are varied, often conflicting, and ultimately out of your control. The more you chase their approval, the more you stretch yourself thin, sacrificing your own well-being to maintain an image or reputation that pleases others. And even then, you may find that the approval you worked so hard for is fleeting or conditional, leaving you feeling unfulfilled and disillusioned. Breaking free from the need for external validation requires a shift in perspective. It means learning to validate yourself from within, cultivating a sense of self-worth that isn't dependent on others' opinions. This involves acknowledging your own achievements, embracing your imperfections, and recognizing that your value isn't something that others can grant or take away. It's about setting your own standards for success and fulfillment, rather than measuring yourself against someone else's expectations. This shift doesn't mean disregarding feedback or rejecting connection with others. It's still important to build relationships and consider others' perspectives. But the difference lies in balance. When you no longer rely solely on external validation, you approach life with more confidence and freedom. You're able to navigate relationships, decisions, and challenges with a sense of self-assurance, knowing that your worth is not up for negotiation. True self-respect begins when you stop looking outward for approval and start looking inward for your own acceptance. The pursuit of perfection is a burden that many people, especially those who are conditioned to be nice, carry throughout their lives. Society, with its expectations of flawlessness, success, and constant improvement, often fuels this relentless drive to be perfect. From the way we look to how we behave, perform, or interact with others, there is an unspoken pressure to always meet the highest standards. For those who have internalized the idea that being nice means being without flaw, the desire to be perfect can become all-consuming and ultimately detrimental to mental and emotional well-being. Perfectionism is, at its core, a form of control. It is an attempt to craft an ideal version of oneself that is inoffensive, flawless, and always pleasant, not just for personal satisfaction, but to meet the often unspoken expectations of others. The idea is that if you're perfect, if you never make mistakes, never let anyone down, and always do the right thing, then you will be accepted, loved, and valued. This creates an internal narrative where anything less than perfection is not only unacceptable, but also a sign of failure. As a result, many people with this mindset fear judgment, criticism, or the possibility of being seen as less than. However, perfection is an impossible standard to live up to. The notion that you must be flawless in all areas of life, whether in your appearance, career, relationships, or behavior, leads to constant self-scrutiny and an inability to enjoy life for what it is. When perfection becomes the goal, every misstep or imperfection becomes a source of shame or anxiety. Rather than viewing mistakes as learning opportunities, they are seen as failures that reinforce the belief that you're not good enough. This endless striving for perfection keeps you in a state of constant dissatisfaction, no matter how much you achieve or how well you perform. Additionally, perfectionism often goes hand in hand with self-criticism. When you hold yourself to impossible standards, you become your own harshest critic. Every minor flaw, every mistake becomes a reflection of your inadequacy. Instead of celebrating your progress, you focus on your shortcomings, ignoring the complexity of what it takes to grow and improve. This internal dialogue can lead to feelings of anxiety, stress, and even depression, as it creates a cycle of never feeling good enough. This constant drive for perfection also stifles authenticity. In trying to meet the ideal image of what you believe others want from you, you lose touch with who you truly are. You become more focused on maintaining the facade of perfection than expressing your true self. The problem with this is that perfection is often defined by external standards, not internal values. It can lead you to mold yourself into something that you believe will gain acceptance or approval, but this version of yourself is often out of alignment with your true desires, needs, and identity. The fear of imperfection also keeps many people from taking risks or trying new things. Since mistakes are seen as unacceptable, any attempt at something new or outside of the norm becomes a source of potential failure. This limits growth, creativity, and even happiness, as you remain locked in a cycle of playing it safe and avoiding challenges. To move beyond the pursuit of perfection, it is essential to embrace imperfection as a natural part of life. Perfectionism, while often praised in a society that values achievement, is a heavy burden to carry. True fulfillment comes not from striving to be perfect, but from accepting your humanity, including your flaws and mistakes. Life is messy and unpredictable, and it is in the imperfections that real growth, connection, and fulfillment take place. When you let go of the need to be perfect, you free yourself to embrace who you truly are, imperfections and all. In conclusion, the pursuit of being the nice girl is a trap that many fall into, believing it to be the key to acceptance, love, and success. However, constantly prioritizing the approval of others over your own needs, suppressing your true self, and sacrificing your well-being leads only to frustration, resentment, and a loss of identity. True fulfillment comes not from compliance, but from authenticity, assertiveness, and a willingness to embrace imperfection. It's essential to understand that being kind, compassionate, and respectful doesn't mean you have to be nice in a way that diminishes your own voice or suppresses your boundaries. You can be kind without sacrificing yourself, assertive without being aggressive, and self-respecting without seeking approval from others. When you stop trying to please everyone, set healthy boundaries, and prioritize your own well-being, you create space for real growth, authentic connections, and a life that reflects your true values and desires. The world doesn't need another nice girl, it needs individuals who are courageous enough to stand in their truth, to say no when necessary, and to embrace the complexity and imperfection that make them who they are. Let go of the need to be liked by everyone and start living for yourself. It's time to stop being the nice girl and start being the real, unapologetic, empowered version of yourself.